our panel discussion, and the topic is the future of education in Africa post-COVID-19. Now, let's just set the context. This is a conversation that is not an invitation to a crystal ball gazing exercise. That is not what we're asking of our panelists. Instead, we're asking them to uncover potentially strategic pathways that are going to lead us to a more effective experience of education on the continent post-COVID-19. This is a conversation that doesn't seek to mask any of the pre-COVID-19 challenges that have plagued the sector, but instead seeks to reframe some of these challenges as an opportunity to do better, as Elian Williamson has invited us to think. What might we do better? Where are the inherent opportunities that we haven't begun to unpack? So maybe let's start off with some big picture thinking, and let's start off with talking at a continental level. And so, Mr. Owusu, I'm going to come to you first. With the bird's eye view, because of the work that you're doing at the African Union, allows you to see the nuances between different countries in Africa. What are you seeing as opportunities for us to do better as we think about transitioning into a post-COVID-19 world?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be on this panel, and I think the issues that we are discussing are really pertinent, and I think these are issues that the African Union has taken a very proactive approach to in terms of the education program. And we really started working on identifying education innovations since 2018, and we've selected a couple of innovations, including Snaplify, which is very prominent, I think, in South Africa. Just recently, with the advent of COVID, we are really trying to see how we can connect these innovations to the member states and try to help them to craft these partnerships that can really see these innovations scaled to the benefit of African countries. But when you talk about opportunities, I think it's very difficult to really use the word in the absolute sense when we look at the situation we are faced with. I think I would like to approach it rather from the perspective of challenges, seeing opportunities in the challenges. So right now with COVID, I think we've been talking a lot about the need to really revitalize the education space in Africa. COVID is really making us see this as something that is not really a luxury anymore. It has become very essential. And our governments are really taking this more seriously in the time of COVID. I think that the issue of innovation in education has never been more prominent until this time. And for us at the African Union, being a policy organization, this is very, very important for us, because then it helps us to really push that agenda to say that the continent needs to move in the right direction when it comes to really making sure that education delivers on its outcomes for the benefit of the continent. And we have really already gotten ministers who have committed to very important initiatives, such as ministers came together and they had a virtual conference to respond to the challenges of COVID. And they agreed that it is really important and essential for African countries to look at alternatives learning solutions that can be used during COVID to really ensure that learning continues. Furthermore, they agreed that ministers and ministries of education need to learn from each other to see what is happening, because COVID is really new, and it is important for us to have that platform to share experiences to make sure that as we move on, we are getting better and better at it.
Okay, fantastic. I love that. So there is this idea of moving into markets, even if it's a minimal viable product, but having to respond to the urgent need on the ground. Maseko, I'd love to build on this idea with you of policy, and I want to go back to some of the numbers that Ian raised. He shared with us that according to UNESCO, Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of education and exclusion. And my own research says that 1 in 5 of all children between 6 and 11 years of age in our region are actually out of school. So the question I want to bring to you is, how do we overcome the challenge of exclusion in a post-COVID-19 world, especially when we are seeing the risks of leaving people behind as we migrate to digital and online platforms becoming so prominent?
Thanks. I think that's a great question, because if we're going to be building inclusive economies and shared prosperity, it basically means access to education for all. And it also means talking about access to quality education for all. What we are seeing with the reality that COVID is painting for us is a re-emergence of old questions and an issue around really prioritizing some of the issues that we've left behind for a very long time. And this is one around the state of infrastructure in our education, the state of infrastructure in our schools. The data that we have available at the moment does not paint the picture in positive light. And while we're talking about innovation and bringing technology into the education system, there's some basics that we need to get right. The data that we're having at the moment shows us that half of the primary schools in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa do not have access to water. So if we're thinking about education as a space where we build human capability, and as a basis, an investment where we're making to make it possible for people to be active citizens and to take advantage of economic opportunities, we have to think about the conditions under which learning takes place, and not to isolate education from the rest of the social sector. The intersections between education and health, for instance, the intersection between education and the skill required for transformative societies and for transformative economies. I think what we're seeing is an overemphasis in thinking about education in an instrumentalized view, where we are so far putting in overemphasis in the development of STEM outside of other sectors within the education system, which allow citizens to play an active role in monitoring the governance of our education system, in playing an active citizenry role where they can ask critical questions around kind of curriculum that is delivering prosperity for us. Over and above innovation, bringing in technology, bringing in the private sector, and mobilizing financial resources. What else? What are the other areas that are supporting our research and development in the education sector that will allow for the skills that are churned out from the education system to support some of the aspirations that we have around transforming the agricultural sector, around research and development for pharmaceutical companies, but also just around putting in place education system that touches on all the fundamental pillars of sustainable development.
For all of us who are familiar with the NECT, we know that at the core of this model is collaboration, is a sense of partnership. And I think the question I want to bring to you is, how do you see the delivery and the experience of education changing in a post-COVID-19 world? And I want you maybe to bring in what needs to be true of the collaborations and partnerships that we have today? What change is going to have to happen in the partnership and collaboration models if we are going to bring about that reimagined education, not only for South Africa, but certainly for the continent as well?
Well, thank you for the question. It's indeed a $1 million question. But let me start by saying I think education has come a long way globally in the past 60 years. There's a good understanding of where education sits in the development discourse and agenda. And the fact that if we don't have educated nations, we aren't going to compete, or meet the needs of our populations. So you see that in the allocation of budgets and the centrality around the discussions of development that education occupies. So to bring it closer to home, in South Africa, the good thing is that in 2012, we agreed on the National Development Plan, which has a 2030 trajectory. So that 2030 trajectory remains the vision that we're working towards. Collaboration, recovery, improvement of education should actually be aimed still at arriving or surpassing the targets that have been set in the National Development Plan. So budget allocations in the past, couple of decades have been good enough. We've just been under 18% of the GDP in education. I think the big challenge in education and in education collaboration is how we take the big visions, how we take the big goals and turn them into practical programming that has measurable outputs, which we show, if put together, will actually take us to the aspired, goals. So, and in fact, lots of collaboration without that level of theorization and prioritization actually fizzle into nothing. You just do a whole lot of things that actually don't turn into something tangible that take us forward. So from the point of the NECT, we have proposed that partners and government work together in about 6 investment areas, investment portfolio, investment areas which we're turning into investment portfolios. And this whole notion of investment portfolios has been there in the previous years. The World Bank has used sector-wide planning approaches and sector improvement plans as an approach, wherein partners can come in and choose areas that they can support to improve specific public services, but with a commonly defined outcome. So that every partnership, every input is what is it? It's aimed at a common set of national goals. So we are putting out investment portfolios. The first one is routine learning. And in fact, Tlhabane will be very close to that. But we've used routine learning, remote learning rather, not routine, remote learning rather, to emphasize the fact that we have to manage the transition from the 19th century learning approaches to the new, mostly technology-based approaches in a properly thought through and sequenced manner. So there are some aspects of remote learning that worked in the past, which we need to bring alongside technology to take the future of learning forward. The second one is psychosocial support. And Marcelo has been saying that often we look at math, science, and technology, and we don't consider the context within which learning and teaching happens. Psychosocial support becomes a very, very important aspect of within which learning takes place. And it's one such portfolio where we need to collaborate to prepare for the maths and science and technology learning that happens in the classroom. The third is reading, which is very central to all the learning and teaching and even in technology. The fourth is community involvement. And the fifth we have defined as education recovery, which largely focuses on how we repackage curriculum in the coming couple of years to ensure that we gain in fact, we close the gaps that have emerged in the past. You surprised that infrastructure, for instance, is not part of those portfolios. It should be part of those portfolios, except for the fact that infrastructure is one of the most inelastic, portfolios, particularly from a partnership point of view. And it's particularly based on the amount of resources that are required to drive that aspect. Infrastructure must include technology as well, It must include broadband. So when we talk of an infrastructure plan, we need to be including technology-oriented infrastructure.
We have seen, especially in the South African context, basic education potentially being one of the most impacted subsectors of education in South Africa. It's certainly been in the media the most. And the question to you is not really about the media, but really to tap in the biggest concerns that the department is addressing at the moment and dealing with at the moment as we try to transition the country into this emergent future that we are headed into. What are the biggest concerns, the top priorities that are sitting on the agenda?
I think my colleagues have indicated earlier on, and I would agree with them that COVID-19 has only served to accelerate some of the plans that we have had on the table, that we've been thinking about, even from policy perspective. We are in the 4IR, and I think this conversation about 4IR has been ensuing for a few years now. And the dictates of 4IR tells us that the type of skills that will be required in the near future by the job market are a bit different from what we are currently providing as education systems across, not only here in South Africa. And that close to 60% of the jobs as we know them today will not exist in the next 10 years or so. Now, this on its own challenge education systems across the world and governments to rethink and re-engineer the education systems. And that our response is not only to the COVID, but has been something that we have been having discussions around about the type of skills that children need to possess for them to be able to enter the job market, and not only as employees within the job market, but also as entrepreneurs who are going to create those new type of jobs. And the skills like critical thinking, collaboration, problem solving, and digital skills that are required by the learners. South Africa, in line with other education systems in the world, we have started the process of ensuring that we move from what we call a knowledge-based education to competency-based education systems that focuses on skills development. And some of those skills are the digital skills that would require our learners to be able to build algorithms, to be able to operate within the technological environment, to be able to operate the artificial intelligence technologies. It is something that we started doing, and we have finalized the curriculum for coding and robotics for grade R up to grade 9, where we are going to teach children how to build apps, how to build algorithms, how to maintain the technological infrastructure. And the type of jobs are going to change. It is a responsibility of every education system to ensure that it repositions itself and it equips its learners with those type of skills.
Digital skills and the digital skills gap is going to be incredibly important. Question to you is, how can we accelerate the work of closing that digital skills gap, and so we really begin to make progress? What would need to be true for us to close that at a faster rate than we have realized so far?
I think there's a big chunk of conversation that we've had around STEM and all of those things, But I think if you really start thinking about it, the things we're talking about today are not necessarily new. How they delivered is fundamentally different. So let me give an example. I studied engineering when I was younger. I think in the mid-90s, we were doing artificial intelligence. We were learning artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and all of those things, even in the mid-90s. What has changed fundamentally that we now are able to talk about things like 4IR is how technologies like cloud and all of those things have really fundamentally changed how we're able to actually make those things come to life, which was not the case maybe 10 or 20 years ago. The concepts around identifying an object in the midst of everything else through a computer hasn't fundamentally changed, but how we can deliver that and leveraging technology is the thing that has fundamentally changed. So I think the issue around relevance is really, really critical for me. The second one is it talks to the conversation I think the chief director had around the curriculum itself. What I find really, really fascinating is what is being taught. What is being taught, you're teaching someone right now, NCC, which was what was taught in the 90s when I was studying. It's like, but that is not what industry is looking for. So the curriculum that we have and kind of the gap between what that curriculum looks like and what industry is looking for is the big gap in my mind. And I think there's a couple of programs that you're starting to see emerging in multiple different parts right across our continent. Programs that don't take you kind of through a BSc degree where the first 2 or 3 years are just maths and stats, but programs that take you straight into, from matric, go straight into 6 months of software development on the latest technologies that are being used right now, a 12-month program that is going to churn out someone who's a data scientist, someone who's going to be employed into industry straight away. The other one is that in the context of the world we're living in now, I refer to kind of thinking from the author of The World is Flat, Thomas Friedman. I think what COVID has done is has actually made the world completely flat. It's made it borderless. It's made it distance is the thing that is key for us. So that helps us then to start think about how we think about skills fundamentally differently. India, as an example, emerged off the back of the internet boom between India and the US in the late 1990s, driven by Y2K. And that's how BPO in India blossomed. We have exactly that opportunity on the African continent as we speak, that actually COVID has flattened the world completely. And how do we think about building Pan-African programs that are going to address the needs of us as a continent? Some of those things are already there, but a lot of it is, I think, what Gordon was speaking about around collaboration. So those are the three things that I think are really, really critical for us to start thinking about fundamentally differently. I think the issue around relevance is really critical, linked to curriculum, but also I think fundamentally the point around how we can think about collaboration. Some of those pieces exist already across the African continent, in South Africa, in many of the other parts of the continent where a company like Old Mutual has presence. How do we leverage off those?
There's a comment here from Leonie saying, we need to be realistic that our learners are not reading at the right literacy and numeracy levels. Many of them are reading below their grade level. And it is more of a comment, but I just want to bring it to you, Kanyisa, to say, what are some of the things that you have observed, whether it is Old Mutual interventions or partnerships that you've had with other partners, that it really have had an impact on shifting numeracy and literacy within context, and of course, as you share those examples with us, the underlying question is always, how do we replicate and scale?
It's very true what Leonie is saying, and I think we saw this firsthand. As we were focusing on maths and science, our service partners kept telling us that there's really a literacy gap, and so by virtue of that gap, it is impacting on how well these learners can actually grasp some of the complexities, whether it was maths curriculum or science curriculum. So for Old Mutual specifically, we have really taken that as a learning. And so it is now informing our next strategy in education, where we're recognizing that working at the senior level grades, by that time it's very late to close some of the gaps. So we have resolved to look into the foundation phase space and the intermediate space, and to focus specifically on improving literacy through reading programs and through embedding the capacity of learners to learn English, but making sure that home language as a base is also fully embedded before we can expect them to capture a second language. So that's going to be our next phase of focus. So we are recognizing the importance of improving literacy and numeracy at foundation phase. And if we get that right, we should then be in a position to expect less remedial work at senior secondary schooling levels.
Now, I've got 1 minute left, and I need to close this in a way that is going to be memorable. So this is what we're going to do. I'd like each of you to think of a billboard that is going to be put up near the busiest highway in your city. And the billboard has a statement, and the statement starts with the future of education, and then you have to complete the statement. Now, the rules of the game is, it's a billboard, it's not an executive summary, it's not a publication in a magazine, so I don't want anything more than 10 words at most. It has to be sharp, it has to be sexy, it has to be memorable, it has to jump out at you, and it starts with the future of education. Complete the sentence.
Is where all learners are economically engaged, are prepared to be economically engaged and fulfilled adults.
Every child experiencing each quality education in the same way across board, whether you are rural or from an urban area.
Is in the hands of African innovators.
The future of education restores human dignity and is centered on human well-being.
The future of education is digital.
The future of education is responsive to the needs of the society and the economy.
Sure. The future of education is responsive to the needs of society and economy. Thank goodness I don't have to make the decision. The only thing that I need to do is to thank you profusely for leaning into this conversation, for being absolutely amazing in the insights, examples, experiences that you have brought into the conversation and into the topic, and to thank you very, very much for your participation. Thank you to you two who has logged on. Thank you for your questions and your comments. They were absolutely brilliant. And for those of you who are setting social media alight by tweeting some of the nuggets, some of the wisdom that has come out of this panel and sharing that with the world, we really appreciate you amplifying and putting volume to what has been, I think, an incredible conversation.